Do you all know how quantum physics works? You do, phew. Neither do I. Takes 3 days. Okay, Reed will explain it to us sometime. Thanks, Reed. I did take a class in college. It was kind of quantum physics for poets. It was the tour of the subatomic zoo. Learned all about muons and quarks, and I don't even remember the rest of the names. Bosons, thanks, yeah. Okay, so you know a little bit about quantum physics, right? So here's my theory. We all know a little bit about quantum physics. You've heard of this idea that like if you can separate particles, and that there's some particles that if one moves, even if it goes across the universe, the other particle will move in a corresponding way. Yeah.
I got one for you.
Okay.
So think about it like this, right? You're driving a car. I'm driving a car, right?
Yeah.
We're going opposite way, you and me. And we drive past each other in that space, creating something that's faster than light.
Wow, okay. That's going to take me a minute to think about. But we've heard about these things, right? It's sort of in our conscious, in our collective subconscious now, this idea about quantum physics. And so we sort of know about it, but don't really understand how it works. And here's my theory. This is how families work as well. So we're talking about the web of relationships, the web of everything, of all existence, of which we are a part, that how it works and how these things are connected. We're going to weave our own web. I know some of you have already brought in fabric to make it. Next week, after the service, if you can stick around during coffee hour, we'll actually get to the weaving. So plan to join us for that. But how exactly does this web get woven? What are the laws of physics that govern how our relationships intertwine and intersect? This is the premise of the body of work of family systems. And so to start, I want to share a story. When I first came back from Vassar College, where I took that class about subatomic zoo, I came back from a mental health crisis. And when I came, I was flipping the family story. I had not been the one in need of care and support in our family. My younger brother was the identified patient, so to speak, of the family. But wouldn't you know it, as soon as I come back with a crisis, he had the nerve to get sick. And so I, at 17, in my slightly altered reality, explained to our family therapist what an absolute, how this absolutely fit the pattern, that here I am, finally in a real crisis, and what my brother does, he goes and gets sick. She gave me a real look. A look both of a 17-year-old just said this to me, and also she said, he's not going to go there with us, so let's try a different tack. Okay, here's another question. What do you know about triangles? No, a few more things than quantum physics, right? You could name, can you name, there's 6 types. I had to look it up. I could get 3 off the top of my head. 6 types of triangles? Right, equilateral, isosceles. Those were the first 3 I came up with. Scalene, that was the one I couldn't remember at all. Equilateral, obtuse, and acute, yeah. So we did learn that, and we also learned about Pythagorean theorem, right? Who still knows Pythagorean theorem? Good, now keep your hand raised if you've ever used Pythagorean theorem in your work life. All right, that's a few more than I thought, that's good. I've used it once or twice to calculate the distance in simulated combat and role-playing games. That's all. Home improvement. That's true. I probably have used it once or twice in a building project. So we all learned these geometrical rules of triangles in high school, but I'm guessing that no one here was taught in your high school curriculum the emotional triangle rules, the rules of how emotional triangles operate in human systems. Is that, I'm right on that? Yeah, okay. So, me neither. Despite the fact that our lives are constructed from them. The other thing that you've probably heard is that the triangle is the most stable structure. And if you want more on that, Buckminster Fuller and the geodesic domes, yes. But it's true in our relationships as well. The dyad, the one-to-one relationship, is inherently unstable. And so when we are in our one-on-one relationships and that instability or anxiety starts to get to a point where it can't be held in that dyad anymore, we triangle in a third point. And that might be another person, or it could be an idea even, or a habit. It could be a group of people. Whatever that third point is, it helps to diffuse the anxiety that is built up between the dyad, because that three-pointed structure, the triangle, is much more stable than the dyad. Edwin Freeman, who is the guy who took all of these ideas that Murray Bowens developed about how family systems work and applied them outside of the context of purely family therapy to community life. He said that the family is the true ecumenical experience of all humankind. And I actually, when I first read that sentence, I read ecumenical as existential. I think that's also true. The family is the basic universal human experience. And they all look different, right? And we do family in so many different ways, but you don't get born into this life without some experience of family. Family is the default state of human experience. Processes that are universal. And families are made up of triangle. In fact, I think being born, you might recognize immediately, is your first experience of being triangulated. Right? And yet when I mention triangulation, it's like I dropped a poisonous spider in the room. Right? The first response, if you know anything about triangulation, is back away. But we can't help being part of triangles. So the point, I think, of learning about triangles is not actually to avoid them, but to better understand how they work. Because while they're unavoidable, mysterious as strange quarks, they're also patterns to how they work. They behave in ways that can become predictable. And thinking about the ways that triangles function can help us shift our focus when we're hooked in one from the content that is driving us crazy to the emotional process at play. So that's what's useful, I think, about studying triangles. And when we have our attention on that emotional process instead of the content, I think we discover that we have more choices than we realize. And this is true in family life, it's true in community life. I think it's true in our wider efforts towards justice in the world. And we'll get into that a little more next week. We become able to, like the Buddha with the young man, know what is ours and what is theirs. And so to that end, Friedman offers 7 laws of emotional triangles, and I'm going to try and explain 7 in about 10 minutes. Let's see if I can do it. So the first law is that the relationship between 2 parts of the triangle is kept in balance by the way a third party relates to each of them. So in my family growing up, my brother and I did not get along. We kept our relationship maintained at a pretty constant simmer of hostility. But it actually rarely blew up. It was just this constant simmer because of the way our mom, and I have two moms, and I'm not going to tell you which one to protect the not so innocent. But because of the way our mom related to us about this conflict, we were able to maintain that stasis of a simmering hostility. The second rule is when the third party in the triangle, if you're the third party, you cannot bring about change for more than a week, Friedman quips. You can't bring about change for more than a week by trying to influence the relationship between the other two directly. Oh, Mom would want us to get along so badly. She pushed and cajoled and did everything she knew how to get us to get along, but alas, she could not convince either of us to like the other any better. Friedman said, well, it may well be that in the history of our species, no family member, upon trying to correct the perception of another family member about a third, has ever received the response, "You're right, honey. I don't know why I didn't see it that way myself." So law number 3, attempts to change the relationship of the other two sides of an emotional triangle are not only generally ineffective, but actually end up reinforcing the status quo. Because of one of the properties of systems, that the reason systems exist is to maintain their homeostasis. And so this principle of homeostasis means that all that pressure that my mom put on us, trying to get me and my brother to get along, it just helped to dig our own heels into our stance in the relationship. So the fourth law, to the extent that a third party to an emotional triangle tries unsuccessfully to change the relationship between the other two, to the extent that they're trying to change it, the more likely it is that the third party will wind up carrying the stress for the other two. Oh, how it killed my mom that we wouldn't get along. But me and my brother, we were fine with the situation. That was just how things were. But it was a source of agony for her, the identified issue that first brought us to that family therapist. This position, this trying to take responsibility for how two other people are relating from the outside, can be called the burnout position. And trying to take care of that, trying to be that responsible one, is the source of the burnout so many in all the helping professions end up feeling. I know that's a lot of folks in this room. There's actually a proverb from that old sacred Hebrew text, Proverbs 26:17, like someone who takes a passing dog by the ears is one who meddles in the quarrel of another. So fifth law of emotional triangle is that triangles in an emotional system interlock with other triangles, so that efforts to bring about change in any one of them is often resisted by the homeostatic forces in the others or in the system itself. So here's the thing, just the way no individual exists outside of these relationships, outside of the triangles that we live in, so no triangle exists outside of a multitude of interlocking triangles. The triangles of our family lives are connected to the one in our work lives, to here in the life of our congregation, other family members' triangles, past generations, right? My brother and I ended up neatly dividing up all the areas of life. I played intellectual board games, he played sports. I got really involved in church. He never set foot in the place after third grade. And so the primary triangle of our family life maintained a rigidity in the rest of these triangles of our lives. The sixth law is that one side of an emotional triangle at any given time tends to be more conflictual than the other sides. So the conflict tends to be located on one side. But generally speaking, the healthier a system is, the more fluidity the conflict will have to travel between the sides. In less healthy relationship systems, the conflict or symptom gets stuck on one side of the triangle. Friedman put it like this. He said, "It's often the distribution and fluidity of conflict in a family that is crucial to its health, rather than the quantity or the kinds of issues that arise." So it's the way that the conflict moves, not how much of it there is or what it's about. Systems in which the triangles are more fluid can tolerate more conflict and therefore more creativity because of that capacity for distribution. When we allow people to move and shift and change in the relationships, when we allow conflict to move between different places in a system, more possibilities, more creativity emerges. When everyone has their roles, when we're defined by our families, by the way that we're expected to relate to one another, then we get stuck. Then there's less room for possibility, for newness and growth. And it really was, for me, getting divorced in the midst of the pandemic almost 3 years ago now that catalyzed a cascade of change in my life. And one dramatic change that no one in my family would have predicted is that I lived for a while with my brother. And then we bought property together and traveled internationally. It is awesome. Yeah, thanks. I hope that change is possible without getting divorced, if that's... In fact, I know it is. But the seventh rule is this: we can only change a relationship in which we belong. The way to bring about change in a triangle is to focus on our own relationship with each of the others. To define those relationships clearly, to think about what our own values are in those relationships, to discover that I wanted to have a relationship with my brother. I've noticed that if there's a conflict between the two sides of a triangle that I'm a part of, and I feel more close to one of the sides than the other, one of the most helpful things I can do is just build a little more connection with the side I feel less close to, if they're in conflict with one another. This is the kind of emotional jujitsu, the kind of navigating an emotional system that is too much to expect of a child, certainly of a child with a really annoying younger brother. But when we are able to take adult responsibility for our relationships, we find that more choices may exist than we realized. In fact, Friedman concludes in these laws of emotional triangles that the most triangled position in any set of relationships, in these interlocking triangles, the most triangled position is always the most vulnerable. And when the laws of emotional triangles are understood, however, it tends to become the most powerful. This is one of the multitude of paradoxes that he illuminates, paradoxes that make me think of quantum physics and strange attractors. And I've been thinking about the paradox also that I've been setting up this sermon series on the web of relationships and connection, and feel like every week I end up talking about coming back to the self as the most important dimension of our relationships. Because the paradox of self in that true self way that we've been talking about, is that we develop the capacity for self in relationship. What I mean is that our nervous systems, they learn how to regulate by literally mirroring the nervous systems of our attachment figures. That as infants and toddlers, as children, our caregivers' capacity to attune to us, to demonstrate empathic awareness of our own internal state while maintaining their own equilibrium. That is what allows us to learn how to attune to our own emotional states, to develop the capacity for self-regulation, which we can use to then make these risky, challenging choices in the triangles that we find ourselves a part of. But unfortunately, none of us are loved just right. None of us are born into family systems free from hang-ups, entanglements, traumas. There's no such thing as a blank slate. We're all born into the middle of the conversation, born a new node, a new intersection in a web that spans back through parents and grandparents, through ancestors, human and non-human, back to the beginning of time. Our caregivers attune to us as they were attuned to once themselves. But the good news is our ability to learn and change and grow, it never ceases. In that vast web of relationships that we find ourselves in, we make places like this where we can keep discovering who we want to be, keep sharing our life's journey, keep practicing what it looks like to live our relationships into the shape of joy and justice. The Chippewa poem says, "I am being carried by great winds across the sky." I thought of the invisible work that stitches up the world day and night, the slow, unglamorous work of healing, the way worms in the garden tunnel ceaselessly so the earth can breathe, and bees ransack this world into being while owls and poets stalk shadows, our loneliest labors under the moon. The work of my heart is the work of the world's heart. There is no other art. Amen. Blessed be.